Chapter 1. The Cartography Witch. First, we must discuss at length a grumpy, bald old man from decades ago who didn't even live where the story takes place. Don't leave. Yes, the main actors are the adorable girl in her dedicated suit of armor. But he's neither prince nor knight, only a country bumpkin playing dress-up after being dragged into a foolish war. The man died a silent pawn and rots in a forgotten battlefield, still without a voice. However, even such a fate is better than Alouette's. How did that child, so free of sin, turn into this? Now everything about her is a lie, a hazy amalgamation of twisted wishes and fantasy. It simply would not be safe for you to know the truth about her. But for now, my dearest and fellow observer, forget about all of that. You must know about the old man. This mapmaker lived on an impossibly tall, grassy hill, topped with an orchard, a windmill, and his humble residence. From the peak, he could survey the world and its edge at a glance. A neat, unmarked gravestone rested in the misty silence outside his doors. He lived in but refused to call the country of Kohuren home. Located across the sea from the mainland, this prosperous and insidiously lawful kingdom welcomed both humans and witches. The mapmaker kept a distance from others, holing up in his study and conversing with the land. Alone, but never lonely. This hunchbacked, prickly relic, who had forgotten how to smile, was kind. So very kind, in a way that didn't fit the standards of this era. Undeniable was the charity he showed during the dusk of his life. It was, as your world would call it, the first domino to fall that would lead to the salvation of our main actors after his death. That is why you must know about the third Cartography Witch. No, we mustn't discuss his real name. Refer to him by his full title, just once, in formal situations, or simply Cartography otherwise. We are in the realm of witches, so we must respect their rules and etiquette. If a witch, no matter how close to your heart, denies access to their name, nod and glue your eyes to the ground. Be ashamed for even asking. Cartography was a living relic of his era from 10,000 years ago, when humanity's civilization rose from the age of gods. As a witch who drew energy from the earth, his survival had been an exception. All he'd known and loved had eroded with the sands of time, swept away on the winds into the sky, to the great soul constellation, the field of stars, harboring the souls of the deceased. What did Cartography do in the 9,900 years after his loved ones had all gone? From his house on the hill, he watched the world as it changed every millennium, and redrew its maps every day. If you had stacked the sheets, they would have played like a film. Finding it too troublesome to relearn all the new words and nuances of language over the centuries, he chose to mumble until his point got across. Most people thought he was insane. His sole visitors were children, invading his orchard to play games, and the occasional treasure hunter or thief demanding a map of hidden riches. However, the old man had nothing to hide and little to his name. Some coveted his virtual immortality, but none cared for his life. Without a single bond, he continued to draw maps like a forgotten automaton, until the curious day of autumn 102,003. Cartography found a boy in some abandoned ruins. The site had been a prehistoric sacrificial altar, out of commission for tens of thousands of years. An inept band of cultists had ignored all reason and tried to sacrifice the boy to please the primordial gods in the Soul constellation. The gods showed no signs of listening. They were no longer so barbaric. Now, Cartography was no busybody or ally of justice. He only cared about making maps, but the dear earth that he perfected diagrams of called to him one day. The message came without words or specifics. It was a direction and foreboding. So Cartography sighed, threw on his traveling cloak, packed the necessities, and shoveled his way there like a man reluctantly but utterly devoted to his wife. The astrolabe, his ornate and equally aged partner, offered its assistance. Creaking open his thick, wooden front door, Cartography waved and replied, "Rest here, old friend," in the light, clear tone of a bygone language. The old man had seen just about everything, so when he arrived at the sacrificial altar, he only raised a brow. He recognized the landmark immediately. Of course he did. Who do you think located it 5 millennia ago? At the top of the rocky, meticulous ziggurat steps sat a boy, no older than 12, shivering in the autumn wind, like a child waiting to be picked up from school. The wind tousled his sandy hair as he gazed into the distance for people who wouldn't come. After patting his stomach in a childish way that didn't suit the pseudo-holy robes draped over him, he perked up. Cartography's ancient complaints reached his ears as the rickety scholar climbed up the equivalent of 5 stories. At first, the boy hid half-heartedly behind a pillar, with wary eyes before fiddling with something in his hand. He held the object against his ear, as if listening to it whisper. Note that everything about Cartography had just about turned to dust, except his eyes. There wasn't a tree that could hide from him in a forest. Even if 1,000,000 stars flared up in the sky at once, he could pick out the boreal star of guidance with some slight annoyance. So, he spotted that in the boy's hand was a knife. Cartography continued trudging up the stairs, mostly because turning back would be a bitter waste of time. When he arrived at the summit, however, nothing abnormal awaited him. There was just the boy, sitting on the final step, knife in his lap. "That's it," Cartography muttered, taking out a canteen and rations of rice crackers and dried fruit as he sat down. The ancient man made an effort to grunt out this millennium's language, asking the boy what he was doing there. Grabbing the food, the boy explained the silly ritual. His parents and their cult had tried to sacrifice him, in exchange for incredible witchcraft. Cartography let out a scoff that almost sounded like a laugh, as if that would ever happen. Just as skeptical, the boy replied, "They're so stupid. They tried to call on Saint the 30th, not even knowing you can only summon the first of the dominions. I can't believe I'm related to those lunatics." The numerous rules of summoning in witchcraft were available and simple. Humans, with their habit of overcomplicating things, couldn't grasp this. Cartography squinted but shrugged, satisfied that answers were coming so swiftly. This child's nonchalance couldn't faze a methodological oddball like him. "And how did you survive, boy?" He pointed at the bronze knife laid on his lap, and not the more reasonable ground, while taking a big gulp of water. Now that Cartography was closer, he realized that the knife was a genuine artifact. The surrounding ruins whispered into his old ears, helping him put the pieces of the mystery together before the boy finished drinking. "You heard the knife's voice. It helped you. I suppose it told you that I wasn't a threat either." "Yeah, it didn't want to cut me, even when my parents— the cultists forced it down." The boy quieted and stopped eating. "I pretended that a god possessed me. told them to disband and never come back. Cartography rubbed his gray beard and muttered observations, not caring if his company could understand. Staying with your parents would be a death sentence. Having them come back to pay tribute to you would be a lie waiting to be exposed. It was a fluke, but you chose the likeliest path to survival. You've got an affinity with the ancient. That's not enough to be a good map maker. The boy caught maybe half of what he was saying, but heard the next part too clearly. Seeing how calm you are, it's no wonder they thought you were some godly monster. A deep frown twisted the boy's face as he snapped, "I was scared, but it's already been days. It's over." His voice and the space between his chest and knees grew smaller with each word. Still, he refused to bury his face like the child he was. Instead, looking straight ahead at the encompassing forest and skyline. Inept with emotional situations, and even worse with children, Cartography did nothing but stare in the same direction. The forest stretched for leagues, obscuring any hopes of finding a town. And this boy survived in fair condition at this altar without food or water for days. "Did the knife tell you to stay here?" Cartography grunted, skipping over consolations that were doomed to fail. "It said I'd save energy if I stayed with it in this place. I don't know where this is, anyway." "That's twice, then. That knife knows how to save your life. Hold on to it, boy," Cartography advised, standing up. "I'm going home. You can follow or stay here. Choose the latter, and you really might morph into a beast chained to these ruins." Hearing that, the boy scrambled to follow. Cartography tutted, interrupting him. "You've got the talent to be a witch. A powerful one, not mediocre and nameless. I wouldn't bother bringing it up if that were the case. Don't go around telling people your real name. It's like exposing your heart and giving someone a knife, trusting they won't think about nudging you with the tip." The boy blinked, impressed by his poetic language that hinted at greater knowledge. Moreover, relief came with all the signs that this old man was more considerate than he seemed. "I know, Gramps. I'm Guillune. I'll keep it a secret from now on." Cartography grumbled in disapproval, pausing when Guillune offered to carry his travel bag. In return, he bought the boy new clothes and shoes at the first town they arrived at. Guillune hounded Cartography with questions and theories about witches the entire way home, to which he'd receive a short grunt for no, and a longer one for yes. The odd pair adjusted as a makeshift family over a decade. Guillune, known to the town as Cartography's apprentice, or Mr. Witch, had grown into a charming, scholarly young man. He lent himself a dignified yet approachable air, using cartography as an example of what not to be. Everyone still believed the old mapmaker was insane, and for good reason. When Guillune first arrived at his new home, he jumped for joy, seeing all the ancient books. This enthusiasm died as it turned out that all of them were written by Cartography, and were about maps or something map-adjacent. There wasn't a corner of the house you could stand in without being reminded of another part of the world in the blandest way possible. Even the ceiling was a giant ultramarine map of the sole constellation. At times, Guillune daydreamed about venturing off to a place with fewer maps, fighting the irony that he would borrow a map to do so. Despite frequently bickering with Gramps, he was more than satisfied with his current life. His stubbornness and shyness wouldn't let him admit it, but he was learning witchcraft and mandatory map-making from the best. Meanwhile, Cartography was the same as ever, though had become less grumpy. He remained a hermit, maybe more now with a begrudging errand boy around. The two enjoyed a peaceful life in the neutral Kohuran kingdom, comfortably an ocean away from the Powder Keg mainland. Unfortunately, we must now discuss it, the grand stage of our story. Two regions made up the continent of Domina, witch Domina and human Domina. The former was the bulk of the landmass, but sparsely populated compared to its human counterpart. For as long as anyone could remember, 4 main territories and lords split the land of witches: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Intersecting them was the Pearl Capital, Justice's domain. Now, human Domina. Attached in the southwest, this peninsula made up 1/6 of the continent's mass. Witches and people, as they were called instead of humans, would giggle that it was less of a country and more of a tumor. Operating with little to no use of witchcraft, its residents drained resources and polluted their surroundings. It was no wonder nature-related witches despised humans. Truthfully, many of those living on the mainland lacked strong, violent opinions about the opposite side. But instigators don't have to be the majority for conflict and war to break out. That meant an impact on the maps. Cartography muttered to himself while reading news scrolls and writing a condensed timeline of major events. What follows is a fraction of that long list. Year 99,992. Human Domina's most prominent merchant kidnaps Jewel the 47th, forcing them to live in captivity and produce precious stones day by day. Overtaken by greed and impatience, they have Jewel cut open to obtain an ultimate treasure. Jewel, whose body was human, dies in vain. This amounted to little consequence for the merchant, who uses their fortune for human Domina's development. Jewel's true ultimate treasure, the Emerald Star, is lost. An anonymous source reveals the tortuous fate that befell them, thus triggering the intra-Domina war between witches and humans. Year 100,003. The king of human Domina harbors a one-sided love for Regalia, the 35th, and tries to forcefully marry her. Regalia goes into hiding and has not been seen since. Long-lived witches and their descendants have not forgiven this, as they lost one of their few gracious uniting figures. Year 101,520. Knight the 254th challenges and massacres all prominent warriors in human Domina. The 255th kills her predecessor, claiming the title and denouncing the wanton behavior. However, grudges linger. Tales of violent, capricious witches spread. Year 101,778. Civil conflicts break out in witch Domina between nature witches and technology witches. The latter, accused of too closely resembling humans, migrate to the other side. Wise and beloved Queen Amelie of human Domina, who brokered a semblance of peace with all sides, goes missing. One witness claims to have discovered her corpse, but it had disappeared by the time help arrived. Not a trace remained, save for her even, bloody footsteps trailing off the balcony. Current year, 102,018. It becomes public that human Domina has been creating and stockpiling weapons specialized in neutralizing witches, dubbed anti-witch mines. Human Domina renames itself Holy Domina for their crusade. The Witch Hunt War officially begins when Autumn the 31st declares war. Guillune shook his head with pity and mild disgust, though it was indifferent relief that lingered. The war didn't affect them. "They're all fools," he complained to Cartography, as the two stood on their hill at sunrise. What was the point of renaming themselves? Domina comes from the word dominion, which is rooted in witchcraft. All witches are technically humans, too. Cartography didn't reply, too absorbed in his survey, peering across the ocean through the astrolabe's lenses. Was the mapmaker more concerned about geography than lives being lost? "Don't be stupid, boy," Cartography grunted after an hour. Guillune had to remember what they had been talking about. "Lives are precious, but if I don't care about the maps, no one will. That's what it means to have a dominion. Even if the world is burning, you stay focused, whether you're creation or the Pebble Witch." "I'd rather stay a no-name witch than be Pebble." Guillune smirked, with a classy derision that he masked from society. He expected a scolding, but what he got instead made a chill run down his spine. Cartography, looking away from his maps in favor of the stars that shone even in daylight, was grinning. "My boy, you still don't understand. That is the beauty of it. The Pebble Witch would rather be themselves than almighty creation," he replied, pointing up at random stars. Guillune squinted at the dusk sky and wondered if the old man had lost it. He couldn't deny the worldliness behind those words, but was too young to appreciate them. What did his teacher see when he gazed up at the sky with those nostalgic, lonely eyes? Those same eyes gazed at him on the day of Cartography's execution. Winter, 94, year 102,018. It was a cold day. "You haven't forgotten, have you? We already know that the old man is no longer with us in the present day. You understand, yes? Time could not kill him, so mankind did. Allow us to have a moment before we discuss the execution itself. Putting it into words will make it a reality. We'll speak of what led up to it. Because of the witch hunt, Cartography's maps became valuable. "You should have bought them before the war," he shouted, slamming the door on the intelligence officers who came knocking. Not that he would have sold them before either. To Guillune's chagrin, he entrusted maps solely to people whom he had a good feeling about. Here is where you must listen carefully if you want to wrap your head around the workings of a witch's mind. You have to understand that he wasn't just a cartography witch. He was the Cartography Witch. A dominion mark in the shape of a compass rose in his left eye manifested the lengths of his obsession and dedication. This man towered above all the witches in his niche. The others had no such mark, and if they wanted it, they would have to prove that they could surpass him. With his knowledge, he could have turned the tides of the witch hunt war. He could have saved the starving human battalion that walked into a desert with parched oases. He could have spared the witches who were unaware of a secret valley that led to the ambush and annihilation of their unit. Cartography could have even ended the war early, if he had chosen a side. Instead, the old man burned every map. He refused to heed Guillune, who grew increasingly concerned about their safety. It was better this way, Cartography muttered to himself. The warmongers could figure things out on their own. 10,000 years ago, he drew his first map so a brother and sister wouldn't get lost in a forest. Not so people could figure out the best path to killing each other. One season into the war, Cartography was sentenced to execution for treason. The self-proclaimed neutral Kohuren had wanted intel as bargaining chips. To broadcast the price of disobedience, the old man was to be hanged in the morning. Guillune had pleaded with him to escape or hide somewhere. It would be effortless for a master mapmaker. Even the land whispered to him, praying for his safety, but Cartography refused to budge. The day before the execution, Guillune appealed yet again, to no avail. Soldiers waiting outside their home allowed him the final dignity of sorting his things. Cartography would shoot an occasional glare at them, making sure they weren't standing on the grave. "Please, Grandpa," a desperate Guillune whispered. All cheekiness and color drained from his young face. "If we beg now, they might let you go. Just give them something. I'll draw the maps instead. You don't deserve to die from a war that you have nothing to do with." "If I give them the maps, I will have something to do with it. Now get out of my face. I don't want a cowardly disciple who buckles to death threats and is willing to sell out the earth. I always knew you'd never be a witch worthy of the Cartography dominion." Guillune didn't know whether to be sad or angry. He opened his mouth, about to throw insults back, when Cartography pointed a bony, unwavering finger at the grave, visible from the window. The soldiers stirred with newfound nerves, somehow intimidated. "I am not leaving her," Cartography stated in his first language. "I buried her there without asking the land for permission. I won't leave this place for you, myself, and especially not any damn country. I was here first." Guillune couldn't say anything. Unable to bring himself to ask who was in the grave, he stood crying quietly. The old man continued to grumble out grievances, all the while gathering the ripest fruits from his orchard and leaving his most cherished tools in the hands of his ex-disciple. Up until now, Cartography had seldom responded when Guillune would playfully call him Gramps. But even he could not deny what he looked like now. A moody, but utterly devoted grandfather, giving his boy lunch for the day. The old man folded an intricate cloth, packing it in a meticulous, efficient pattern that Guillune had never cared to notice before, a traditional method from his true, bygone homeland. Guillune stared down at the process, trying to memorize it with what little time he had. Why hadn't he made this effort when he had the chance? Guillune buried his face on this night and the dawn of his teacher's hanging. He didn't have it in him to look, but the creaking of the gallows and the strained rope wouldn't let him pretend otherwise. The only other sounds were the chirping of birds and low streams of wind. A morning, beautiful and calm. And the compass rose in Cartography's eye, faded away. Guillune trembled with fury. His forehead and fingertips bled as he ground them into the bark of the tree he hid behind. Revenge. His mind ran through fantasies of the ways he would corner and kill the people who gave the sentencing. He managed to take a deep, gasping breath. He tried to remove himself from grim thoughts. Alone, he could do nothing but spiral. This incident would scare others into cooperating with the kingdom, and if they didn't, there would always be another. Eventually, there would be someone who would fold. To those at the top, everyone was dispensable. Guillune writhed with hatred, inundated with this ugly truth. Why was the world like this? Why did everyone go along with it? Were they complacent? Blind? Stupid? Revenge. The grieving young man's mind cycled back, the thoughts growing louder with his palpitating heart. He looked up to see his teacher hanging, the guards' bored faces. A grudge as murky as the sea's depths surged through him. He had kept the altar's dagger all this time. Resting inside his cloak, it chimed, expressing that it would stand by his decision, no matter how bloody. However, if Guillune were to draw out its power, it would be of sacrifice, not heroism. Guillune whispered an apology to the gods, who had taken pity and saved him years ago. He apologized for his parents' bastardized summoning that had pricked the gods for attention. Apologized for squandering his life, and the affinity for the ancient that the gods had gifted him. Thanked them for saving a talentless, futureless human like him. Finally, he said thanks for his time with cartography. The gods lying in the stars closed their myriad eyes without judgment or punishment. When the prayer's last word faded into silence, Guillune's face warped in rage. He gripped the hilt of his dagger, and a voice rang in his head, but not the knife's. "Young man, your ship leaves the docks soon." He froze. It was the late cartography witch's ancient astrolabe. The golden disk spoke again from inside his bag. "Now go, unless you want your life to end in a meaningless rampage." "You were his friend, but didn't try to stop him," Guillune whispered through tears. "Don't you feel anything? Do you understand what happened? Do you know how painful it is to die by hanging? Don't you feel anything? Do you understand what happened? Do you know how painful it is to die by hanging?" Bitter questions left the young man's tongue so quickly that they became rhetorical. His heart had closed, yet he still demanded an answer. If he didn't receive one soon, the dagger would be his solution. The astrolabe clicked. It parsed the information in a way that couldn't be called thinking, as it was an object without a soul. But because of this, the answer it gave was more sincere than the average person could ever manage. It was a beautiful 10 millennia with him. Take care of our mechanical body, so we can see the next 1,000 years together as well. Beauty was the last thing Guillune wanted to think about. Nonetheless, a deep shame tangled with his anger as he heard the innocent words. Memories of cartography's rare, sudden burst of passion about the beauty of the world flashed in his mind. The days that cartography stood in rumbling storms, the freezing cold, and deathly hot days to look through the astrolabe on top of the hill. He never missed a single day. Except for the day before his execution. He spent it with Guillune. The old mapmaker hadn't even taken one final look through the astrolabe. "One more thing, dear child. You were too polite to ask, and he was too stubborn to say it. But he wanted to tell you. His true name is..." A new star twinkled in the Soul constellation. Guillune broke down, crying, and his hand left the dagger. Whispering goodbye under his breath, he turned around and marched to the piers, clutching his bundled belongings. He left the Kohuran kingdom for good. After several wearisome days of sailing across the sea, he arrived in Witch Domina, and would count the days until the curtain fell on the witch hunt war. After 10 long years, the end came. Finally, the man stared out the window of his private office, his mind laden with the undertaking of rebuilding. He had taken residence in Callum, a quaint town far from the border. Sighing, he adjusted the monocle resting on his left eye. His sight had gotten worse, and his sandy hair had grown longer. The man's cynical temperament had mellowed out in the face of tragedy, and matched his cool wit and resourcefulness, a combination that served him well in becoming an official in Witch Domina. Most of all, he was now the artifact witch. Not a single person knew his real name or history. Good news of the war had arrived via a white carrier pigeon, one of the many justice familiars. Similar bleached birds landed in towns and city hubs all over Witch Domina to spread the message. The public would be ecstatic to know the fighting would end. However, Artifact raised a brow when he read the address. People of Witch Domina, the witch hunt war has ended with the surrender of Holy Domina. Live without fear. Peace the First, the witch killer, has been slain. Her true name was Olivera. Now that it is known, we have nothing to fear. If you happen upon the humans, find it in your heart to treat them with empathy. We can never extinguish the embers of war otherwise. I swear on my dominion to arbitrate peace between all sides of our continent, regardless of my standing as a witch. Justice the 1000th. Olivera? Artifact muttered, holding his hand over his mouth in thought. I can't believe they managed to kill her. How did they find out her name? As odd as it was, he didn't dwell on speculation. 10 years, Artifact thought. He caught a glimpse of the bittersweet smile in his reflection before shrugging and organizing stacks of diplomatic paperwork. Around him, polished antiques saved from destruction during the war clamored in a voice that only he could hear. Retired weapons belonging to ancient warriors glimmered, satisfied that their current master was happy. They had always sensed the aching lament that Artifact hid with gentle smiles. Settle down, everyone. If you want to chat, wait until I'm out of earshot. And we can't relax. The work is never over. Not everyone's going to be happy with peace. The antiques, almost childish in his presence, simmered down. Some whined before going quiet, whereas others dozed off or had hushed conversations about the past and future. An array of legendary weapons, including the sacrificial dagger, rested in the shaded corner of the room, like old, sleeping guard dogs. The astrolabe of the Honorable Third Cartography Witch hadn't said a word after hearing the news, but thought the same thing as Artifact. If he had gone into hiding, he would have been sick of waiting. What would it have been like if he were here? He would have liked Callum too. The moment of reminiscing passed. With a soft smile, Artifact adjusted his lens and returned to work.